The knock came just after dawn, sharp mechanical final. Ethan Cole jolted awake on the worn-out recliner, the faded blankets still tangled around his legs. He blinked twice, heart already racing, because deep down he knew this wasn't a neighbor dropping by. It was the kind of knock that didn't ask permission. It announced an ending. 3 uniformed officers stood outside the narrow window of his rented home. Behind them, a man in a blazer tapped a clipboard against his palm, checking his watch like this was just another Tuesday. Lily, his 8-year-old daughter, peeked from the hallway clutching Ranger's leash. The golden retriever stood alert beside her tail, still ears perked. "Dad," she whispered. "Are they here for us?" Ethan swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "Get your coat, sweetheart." By the time the front door opened, Ethan was already holding out the envelope that had arrived 2 weeks ago, final notice of property repossession. The officer barely glanced at it before stepping past him. "You got 20 minutes, the man with the clipboard said. "Anything left behind becomes county property." Ethan's stomach turned. County property. As if their memories' wedding photos, Lily's sketchbooks, his late wife's favorite mug, could be reduced to inventory. He packed in silence, his motions robotic. Ranger trotted alongside him, weaving through boxes. Lily tried to carry her stuffed elephant, a sketch pad, and a framed photo of her mom all at once, her thin arms trembling. As they stepped out onto the icy sidewalk, Brad's silver SUV rolled up to the curb like it had been waiting. Brad, his older brother by 3 years, got out, slowly adjusting the collar of his peacoat as if dressing for a eulogy. Diana, their younger sister, climbed out from the passenger side, her heels clicking on the pavement with cool authority. Ethan, Diana said without preamble, holding out a manila folder. "We've come up with a solution." Ethan didn't take it. "You mean a way to separate me from my daughter?" Brad sighed. "Come on, man. Be reasonable. Lily can stay with Diana and Mark No, and you'll have time to get on your feet," Diana added. "There's space at the transitional housing downtown. You'd get meals, medical care. You need that, Ethan." "I need her," he snapped, pulling Lily a little closer. Brad rubbed his temple. "You're not thinking straight." "I'm thinking very straight. You want to divide us like it's logistics, like she's a problem to be filed and shelved." Diana's voice softened slightly. "Look, Mom and Dad left the old cabin in your name. It's remote, falling apart, but it's something." Ethan's brows drew together. She handed him a rusted key attached to a worn leather tag. "It's all we've got left. Take it. You'll be out of the city. Nobody will come looking for bills up there." He didn't say, "Thank you," just took the key. By noon, the 3 of them, Ethan, Lily, and Ranger, were driving north on the old highway with whatever fit in the back of his aging truck. The roads twisted like gray ribbons between bare-limbed trees, winter clinging to the hills. Lily sat quietly beside him, hugging her stuffed elephant. She didn't ask questions, she didn't complain. She just stared out the window with eyes too tired for her age. As they crested a narrow ridge and the road dipped toward the valley, she finally spoke. "Dad, is this place really ours?" He didn't look at her. "Yeah, baby. It's ours. Even if it was broken. Especially if it was broken." The cabin came into view as the sun dipped low behind the ridge. A skeleton of its former self, shingled roof sagging one side, caved-in porch barely standing. The front door hung open, slightly creaking with every gust of wind, like it was sighing after a long sleep. Ranger leapt from the truck as soon as they stopped, nose to the ground, tail twitching. He sniffed around the perimeter, circling like he had a mission. Ethan noticed how alert he looked more than usual. "Stay close," Ethan said, watching Lily's small boots crunch through the frozen weeds. Inside, the air was musty and bitterly cold. Dust floated in sunbeams like ghostly threads. A rat scurried somewhere in the wall. The fireplace was cracked, half the chimney missing. No electricity, no running water. This wasn't a home. It was a memory, and even that was crumbling. Still, Ethan set down the bags, rolled out 2 sleeping mats, and lit the emergency lantern he always kept in the truck. They ate canned beans in silence. Lily's breath fogged in the cold. "Dad," she said, after a long while, "are we going to be okay?" He looked at her, then really looked. Cheeks flushed, eyes rimmed red from cold but still trusting him completely. "We don't have much," he said, voice low. "But I promise you this, I'll never leave you. No matter what." She nodded, then pulled her sleeping bag up over her chin and whispered, "This place smells like Grandpa's boots." He laughed just once and it cracked something open in his chest. That night, Ethan lay awake holding Lily close beneath a pile of blankets. Ranger lay curled at their feet, ears twitching. Outside, the wind howled like it was searching for something to carry away. The moonlight streamed through the jagged hole in the ceiling, casting broken shadows across the floor. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, and then a sound that made Ethan sit bolt upright. Lily was coughing. A dry, wheezing, unrelenting cough that shook her small frame. Her hand clutched her chest, face scrunched in pain. "Hey, hey, breathe with me, sweetheart," Ethan said, panic rising. Out. That's it. Ranger stood up, tail stiff, and let out a sharp, eerie howl toward the door. Then silence. Ethan's blood turned cold, because he knew in that exact moment something had to change. Staying warm wasn't enough. Surviving wasn't enough. Lily needed help, and tomorrow somehow he'd find it. The mountain morning bit into Ethan's skin like frostbitten regret. He hadn't slept, not really, just dozed in snatches between bouts of worry. Each time Lily coughed in her sleep, he felt it like a blow to his chest. Ranger had stayed awake too, pacing the room like a sentinel, always glancing at the girl, always alert. By sunrise, the fire was embers. Lily stirred with a whimper, her cheeks flushed, a damp sweat clinging to her brow. Her breath still wheezed tight, raspy wrong. Ethan didn't hesitate. He lifted her gently from the blankets, wrapped her in his old army coat, and whispered, "We're going for a ride, baby girl. Hang on." Ranger jumped into the back of the truck without being called. He knew. Somehow that dog always knew. The drive down the mountain was slick and winding, frost glittering across the curves like glass. Every mile closer to the town below, Ethan felt his hands tightening around the wheel knuckles, bone white. He hated hospitals. Hated being judged. Hated filling out forms that asked for things he didn't have: insurance numbers, employment, verification, emergency contacts. But this wasn't about him anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. The town of Alder Glen was small, a scatter of one-story buildings, a gas station, and a diner that hadn't updated its menu since 1985. The community health clinic sat at the far end of Main Street, nestled between a post office and a feed store. The sign out front was hand-painted but proud, Alder Glen Community Medical. Caring, even when it's hard. Ethan parked under a pine tree and carried Lily inside. Her head rested on his shoulder, warm, with fever fingers curled into his shirt like she was still dreaming. The waiting room was empty. Help Ethan called, voice hoarse. "Is anyone?" A door swung open. And in walked Claire Whitman. She wasn't what he expected. Not the white coat kind of doctor, not really. She wore jeans and hiking boots under her navy cardigan, hair pulled into a no-nonsense ponytail that still somehow made her look elegant. Her eyes were sharp, the kind that measured everything in a glance, not just your vitals, but your fear, your shame, your story. She took one look at Lily and didn't waste a second. "Bring her back," she said, already moving. Exam room 2. Ethan followed the smell of antiseptic and cedarwood drifting through the hallway. In the room, Claire worked with calm precision. Oxygen, mask, pulse, ox monitor, stethoscope. "She's wheezing," she muttered. "Lungs are tight. Probably reactive airway, could be asthma, could be environmental." She adjusted the mask on Lily's face and turned to Ethan. "Has she had attacks like this before?" He shook his head. "She gets colds easily, but this is worse. Altitude can make it worse. Cold dust mold. Your place is, it well sealed." Ethan hesitated. Claire didn't press. She could read between the silence. After the nebulizer treatment started humming, Claire stepped aside. "We'll let her finish this cycle, then reassess. She's stable right now." Ethan exhaled his knees, nearly giving out. He sat on the chair next to the cot, watching his daughter breathe. "Thank you," he said softly. Claire folded her arms. "You're not from town." "We're staying up on Raven's Ridge," he said. "Old cabin. Used to belong to my folks." Her brows lifted. "That place is barely standing." "Yeah," he said. "We noticed." There was a long pause. Then Claire pulled a card from her pocket and handed it to him. "This is for medical homebound instruction. If she needs to stay out of school, this gets her services legal ones. There's a hotline number too if things escalate." Ethan turned the card in his fingers. It felt like more than plastic. It felt like dignity. "I don't have insurance," he admitted. "Or income. Just temp jobs when I can find them." Claire didn't blink. "We work on sliding scale here, and health isn't a luxury." He nodded. A breath caught in his throat, but he swallowed it down. She leaned against the counter. "There's another option. Off the record, there's a natural spring not far from your cabin, part of a thermal fault line. Locals have used it for generations. Warm, mist, high humidity mineral content. Might help her breathe." Ethan studied her face. "Are you suggesting I bathe my daughter in a mountain puddle?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I'm saying nature has its own medicine. Not a cure, but it might ease her symptoms. You'll need to watch her closely, and if she gets worse, you call me." He nodded again. Slowly this time. Claire checked her watch. "I'll give you a pulse oximeter and a nebulizer for at home. Do you have electricity? No. Just batteries and sunlight when we're lucky. I'll throw in an extra solar charger." He blinked. "Why are you helping us?" Claire's eyes met his steady. "Because someone helped me once, and because she's a child, and because you look like you haven't let yourself be helped in a long time." The words hit harder than he expected. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. By the time they drove back up the ridge, the sun was a pale coin in the sky, peeking between clouds. Lily was asleep in the back seat, Ranger curled protectively at her feet. Claire's card sat in the cup holder beside a new bag of supplies Ethan hadn't asked for, but hadn't refused. Halfway up the trail, Ranger barked suddenly and leapt off the road. Ethan slammed the brakes. "What is it, boy?" Ranger stood stiff ears up, nose twitching toward a break in the tree line. Ethan hesitated, then followed. They climbed down a slight incline brush cracking beneath their boots until they reached a moss-covered opening barely visible unless you knew where to look. A door, an old wooden hatch nearly swallowed by earth and time. Ethan knelt, brushed away the debris, and tugged. It groaned open. Inside darkness, then the glint of metal. Shelves, tools, tarp, gas cans, food tins, a backup generator, his father's emergency storage. Ethan stepped inside slowly, memories flooding in. The old man had prepped this place for Y2K. He'd been mocked for it. But now it was salvation. Ranger patted in behind him, tail wagging softly like he just brought Ethan to the center of some secret world. Ethan stood in the middle of the hidden room, hands on his hips. Maybe they could make this work. That night, Lily slept easier. Not perfectly, but better. Ethan stayed up reading the home nebulizer manual by flashlight. Claire's words echoed in his head. "You look like you haven't let yourself be helped in a long time." He looked at his daughter, at Ranger curled up like a guardian, at the roof that still needed patching, at the world that hadn't given up on them yet. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel alone. The next morning came cold and bright sunlight spilling through the broken rafters like golden ribbons. Frost still clung to the corners of the windows, but the air inside the cabin was warmer than the day before, not just because of the small fire Ethan had managed to get going, but because something had shifted. Lily's breathing was easier. It wasn't a miracle. She still needed the nebulizer Claire had given them, and Ethan checked her oxygen levels like clockwork. But the rasping wheeze had faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of a child at rest. Ethan stood by the cabin door mug of weak instant coffee in hand, watching the trees sway gently outside. Ranger sat beside him, tail thumping against the floor, eyes scanning the ridgeline like a soldier on watch. "You did good," Buddy Ethan murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Real good." Ranger leaned into the touch. Ethan's eyes drifted toward the slope behind the cabin where the hidden hatch had revealed his father's old emergency cache the night before. It was like a lifeline had appeared out of nowhere, tarp tools, even a half-working propane lantern. But more than that, it felt like a message from the past. A reminder that he came from people who survived even when the world told them they couldn't. And now it was his turn. By midday, Ethan was in work mode. He propped Lily's sleeping mat near the fireplace within arm's reach of the nebulizer and pulse oximeter, then headed outside with Ranger trotting close behind. The roof needed patching first. No more freezing wind slipping through at night. No more waking up soaked in condensation and fear. The haphazard supplies in the cache had given him a place to start weathered boards, a spool of wire, even some old nails. His fingers were out of practice, but muscle memory kicked in. Years as a maintenance tech at the paper mill hadn't disappeared entirely. Every swing of the hammer, every screw twisted into place felt like reclaiming a piece of himself. Ranger barked once from below, tail wagging as he nosed around something in the weeds. Ethan climbed down to find him nudging a long-forgotten window frame, glass shattered, but the wood intact. "You want us to have a view again?" Ethan chuckled. "All right, boy. Let's see what we can do." Later that afternoon, as Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, he heard the crunch of gravel and the soft hum of tires coming up the mountain trail. Claire. She pulled up in a dusty Subaru, stepping out in a fleece jacket and jeans, a tote bag slung over one shoulder. Her hair was loose today, falling in soft waves, and Ethan tried not to notice the way the sunlight caught the strands. "I brought a fire extinguisher," she said, lifting the bag. "And something else you might need." "Should I be nervous?" Ethan asked, smiling. She handed him a small plastic device. "Peak flow meter. Tracks Lily's lung function. We can monitor patterns and catch signs of distress earlier." "Smart," he said, impressed. Claire glanced at the cabin. "Looks better already." He followed her gaze, proud despite himself. "I found some supplies. My dad was a bit of a prepper. Turns out that makes him a genius now." She laughed gently. Survivalists always sound crazy until the world actually falls apart. A comfortable silence settled between them as Ranger nudged her hand for attention. She knelt down, rubbing behind his ears. "Your dog's something else," she said. "He's been guiding you, hasn't he?" Ethan nodded. "It's like he knows what we need before we do." Claire stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "Do you mind if I check on Lily?" "Not at all. She's been resting more. Breathing's easier today." Inside, Claire moved with the calm assurance of someone who had done this 100 times, but with Lily, her voice softened. She knelt beside the girl, checking her vitals, her color, her lungs. "You're doing great, sweetheart," she said, brushing a wisp of hair from Lily's forehead. Lily looked up through sleepy eyes. "Did Ranger tell you to come?" Claire smiled. "Something like that." When they stepped outside again, the sun was lowering behind the ridge. The air turned colder, crisp with the promise of evening. "Thank you, Ethan," said his voice quiet. "For the supplies. For showing up." Claire looked at him for a long moment. "You don't have to do all this alone, Ethan." He looked down. "It feels like I do." "You have her," she said, nodding toward the cabin. "And him," she added, gesturing to Ranger. "And maybe me, too, if you'll let me." He didn't answer right away. Claire didn't push. She glanced at her watch. "I should get back before dark, but I'll come by in a few days to check Lily's levels." "Sure. Drive safe." She turned to leave, then paused. "There's a spring about half a mile west. Not the one I told you about earlier, a little more hidden. Locals say the water's richer in minerals. If you're up for a hike tomorrow, it might be worth the walk." Then she got in her car and drove off the tires, kicking up a soft trail of dust behind her. Ethan stood there long after she was gone. That night, Lily was well enough to sit at the small wooden table Ethan had cleaned off earlier. They had soup-canned chicken noodle and crackers, and Ethan managed to find 2 mismatched spoons that didn't rust in his hand. "Dad," Lily said between bites, "do you think Mom would like this place?" Ethan's throat tightened. He hadn't talked about Sarah in weeks, months maybe. It hurt too much. But tonight something felt different, like the words weren't jagged anymore. "She would," he said softly. "She always loved the mountains. Said they were honest." Lily nodded, her eyes wide. "I think she'd like Claire too." Ethan chuckled. "Do you now?" She smiles like Mom did when she wasn't tired, and she listens. That silenced him for a beat. He reached across the table, squeezed Lily's hand. "You're a smart kid." "I know," she said, mouthful of crackers. They both laughed. After Lily was asleep, Ethan stepped out onto the porch. The stars had started to appear bright and sharp against the dark canvas of the sky. He pulled his coat tighter, exhaling slowly. Ranger sat beside him, head resting on his paws. Ethan looked down at the dog. "You really think I can do this?" Ranger didn't move. Didn't have to. Ethan stared out into the forest, the night alive with crickets and wind. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. The trail wasn't on any map. It wound through thickets of pine and narrow switchbacks, fading in and out like it was drawn in charcoal and half erased by time. But Ranger followed it like he'd known it since birth, nose to the earth tail, low and steady. Ethan trudged behind Lily on his back in a makeshift carrier fashioned from a blanket and a sturdy canvas strap. She rested against him, her breath warm on his neck, quiet and calm for once. That calm was everything to Ethan. He could walk forever like this if it meant keeping that sound, that peace. Claire's directions had been simple. Look for the twin birch trees about a mile west. The springs tucked behind them. You'll smell the sulfur before you see the steam. And she was right. The air shifted as they climbed. Earthier, wetter. The kind of smell Ethan remembered from hot springs he'd visited as a teenager when life still felt wide open. "Ranger." "Wait," Ethan called as the dog disappeared through a cluster of brush. The next moment, the thicket parted and he saw it. A small clearing cupped between 2 rising hills. At its center, the spring gurgled quietly, steam curling into the morning light. The water wasn't deep, just a pool large enough for a few people to soak, but it shimmered pale blue with flecks of white mineral swirling near the edges. Stones lined the rim, weathered smooth over time. It was like stepping into another world. Quiet, protected, sanctuary. Ethan lowered Lily gently onto a dry patch of moss and sat beside her. She blinked at the rising mist, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is this it?" "Yeah, baby," he murmured. "This is the place." She took a shallow breath through her nose, exhaled slowly. "It smells like boiled eggs." Ethan laughed, the sound echoing lightly off the rock. "Yeah," he agreed. "Not exactly roses, huh?" Lily giggled, and the moment stretched out like a warm blanket. Ranger dipped a paw into the edge of the pool, then sat down and stared at Ethan, expectant. Ethan leaned forward, testing the water. It was warm, almost body temperature enough to soothe, not burn. "You think it'll help?" Lily asked, her voice small. "I don't know," Ethan said honestly, "but we're gonna try." He rolled up her pant legs, dipped her feet into the edge first. She flinched, then let out a little sigh. "Feels funny," she said, "like a hug for my toes." Ethan smiled, his chest tightening. That's what this place felt like, too. They came back the next day. And the day after that. And soon it became part of their rhythm. Ethan carrying Lily down the trail each morning, Ranger leading the way like clockwork. They'd sit at the edge of the spring for an hour or two, letting the steam wrap around them, letting Lily's lungs drink in the warmth. Each day, her breathing improved. Not dramatically, not overnight. But Ethan noticed it in the way she woke up coughing less, how she didn't cling so tightly to his arm, when walking short distances, how her voice carried a little farther in the woods. It wasn't just the water. It was the stillness, the quiet, the space to heal. One afternoon after their soak, Ethan decided to build a handrail down the steepest part of the trail. He didn't want to risk a fall if they were going to keep coming. He used rope from the storage hatch and split branches into posts, anchoring them with river stones and determination. Lily sat nearby, sketchbook on her knees, drawing Ranger as he sniffed through the underbrush. "Can we make a sign?" she asked. "For the spring, so people know it's special." Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. What would it say, she thought for a moment. A place to breathe. He stilled, then nodded. "Yeah," he said. "That's perfect." That evening, Claire returned. Ethan was fixing a leak in the stovepipe when he heard Ranger's bark and saw her car crunch to a stop beneath the trees. She stepped out, holding a paper bag in one hand and a folder in the other. "Brought you something," she said, lifting the bag. "Fresh produce from the co-op. And this?" She tapped the folder, is Lily's homebound instruction plan. "Officially signed off by the district nurse. You're covered legally." Ethan took it surprised at how heavy the folder felt in his hands. Not in weight, just in meaning. "Thank you," he said, quieter than he meant to. Claire glanced past him into the cabin. "How is she?" Better, Ethan said. "We've been going to the spring every day. I patched the trail, built a handrail. She's even drawing again." Claire smiled. "That's good." There was a pause. Then Ethan gestured toward the fire pit. "You want to stay for dinner? We've got carrots now, apparently." She laughed, that soft laugh he was starting to recognize, the one she gave when she let her guard down. "I'd like that." They sat around the small fire as the sky turned lavender. Lily talked about her drawings. Claire listened with full attention, asking questions, laughing at Ranger's antics when he tried to sneak half a carrot off her plate. Ethan watched them both heart full in a way that scared him. When Lily finally fell asleep inside the cabin, Claire stood brushing pine needles from her jeans. "I should go," she said. "Early clinic shift tomorrow." "Of course," Ethan said, but something in his voice made her pause. "I'll come by in a few days to check her progress," she added. He nodded. "You don't have to. But I'd like that." Claire looked at him for a long moment. The firelight danced in her eyes, softening the lines of her face. "You're doing more than surviving out here, Ethan," she said quietly. "You're building something." Then she turned and walked to her car. This time, Ethan didn't watch her leave with regret. He watched her leave with hope. Later, as he climbed into his sleeping bag beside Lily and Ranger, curled at their feet, Ethan looked up at the patched ceiling and whispered, "She's right. This is the beginning of something." And outside, just beyond the tree line, the silent spring kept steaming unseen and eternal. It started with the sound of tires on gravel. Not the steady, familiar hum of Claire's Subaru. No, this was heavier, slower, more deliberate, like the engine was announcing its presence before it ever crested the ridge. Ethan stood up from where he'd been splitting wood near the cabin, wiping his hands on his jeans. Ranger, lounging by the porch, lifted his head ears, snapping upright. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Lily was inside, humming softly as she colored in a picture of the spring. Ethan glanced toward the trail that led down to the road, and then he saw them. Brad's silver SUV pulled to a halt just beyond the clearing, kicking up a cloud of dust. The passenger door opened, and Diana stepped out, dressed in a crisp jacket and designer boots wholly unfit for the terrain. Behind her came a man in slacks and a fleece vest, clipboard in hand. Some kind of land consultant or broker, Ethan guessed. And then Brad got out. He looked older than the last time Ethan had seen him just a few weeks ago, but a lifetime in emotional distance. His eyes swept the clearing, the newly repaired cabin, the faint curls of smoke from the chimney. Then he spotted Ethan. "Well," Brad said, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "Looks like you've been busy." Ethan didn't move. "What do you want?" Diana stepped forward, her smile tight. We've been hearing things. From town. People say you found something up here. People say a lot of things. Brad gestured toward the clipboard guy. This is Wyatt. He's a water rights consultant. We just want to get a sense of the property's potential. You know, see what's possible. Ethan's jaw clenched. You mean how to sell it? Diana gave a practiced chuckle. Let's not be dramatic. Look, you're doing the best you can. We see that. But this land could be worth a lot more than sentimental value. Spa resorts pay top dollar for mineral springs. You could cash out. Secure Lily's future. Ranger barked sharply as if even he could smell the opportunism. I'm not interested, Ethan said flatly. Wyatt stepped forward, polite but firm. If you're concerned about access, we're not here to make any changes. Just a survey. Non-invasive. You come near that spring, Ethan said, and you'll have a problem. Brad raised his hands. Come on, Ethan. Be reasonable. You're not a land developer. You're living in a patched-up shack with a sick kid. You don't even have running water. I've got enough, Ethan said, and more than either of you ever gave me. Diana folded her arms. Don't start with that. You started it, Ethan shot back. The day you tried to split me and Lily apart like we were furniture to be rehomed. A tense silence. Then Brad's expression hardened. Look, we tried to help you. We gave you the cabin. We backed off. But now that you've found something valuable, it affects all of us. That water runs through the same land our parents left to all three of us. You think you own the whole mountain? No, Ethan said, stepping forward. I just know what it's worth. And it ain't measured in dollars. Wyatt cleared his throat. Legally speaking. You're not talking to a lawyer, Ethan interrupted. You're talking to a father who finally found a place where his daughter can breathe. So, unless you're here to help chop wood or carry supplies, I suggest you turn that car around. Another silence followed, colder than the wind beginning to pick up between the trees. Then Diana looked toward the cabin. You know, CPS still does wellness checks out here, she said, voice low. Cabins aren't exactly standard housing. And if someone raises concerns... Ethan's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening me? No, she said, just reminding you how fragile custody can be. Before Ethan could respond, the front door creaked open. Lily stepped outside, cheeks pink from the fire scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. She held up her drawing proudly. Dad, look. I drew Ranger as the guardian of the spring. The color drained from Brad's face, and Ethan saw it, that flicker. Not greed, not malice, envy. Because in that one innocent moment, Lily looked happy, safe, loved. Brad turned away first. We'll be in touch, he muttered. Diana didn't say anything, just followed him back to the car. Wyatt offered a half-hearted nod, then trailed after them. The SUV backed out slowly, gravel crunching beneath the tires until it disappeared behind the trees. That night, Ethan sat beside the fire inside the cabin, Lily nestled against his side with her drawing pad, Ranger dozing near their feet. He didn't tell her about the threat, about the clipboard, about CPS. He didn't need to. She already felt it in the air. Are they going to make us leave? She whispered. He shook his head. Not if I have anything to say about it. She looked up at him, small and serious. You always say we don't have much, she murmured. But I think we have everything. Ethan swallowed hard. Yeah, he said. We do. 2 days later, Claire returned. But this time, she didn't come alone. She brought documents, plans, safety checklists, building codes, educational exemptions, everything a social worker or inspector might ask for. You knew they'd come back, she said, sitting across from Ethan at the cabin table. I did. So did I. She tapped the stack of papers. These prove Lily's safe here, that you're providing medical care, education, stable housing. If they try anything, we fight it legally. You're not alone. Ethan stared at her. The weight of that hit harder than he expected. You really believe in what we're doing here, he said quietly. Claire nodded. I believe in you. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Inside, for the first time since he'd arrived on this mountain, Ethan felt something settle deep in his bones. Resolve. The air had changed. Not in a way you could see not yet. But Ethan felt it, in the tightness of the breeze, the hush that fell over the forest. Even the birds seemed quieter, their songs shorter, clipped like they were in a hurry to finish before something arrived. Ranger felt it too. He stood at the edge of the porch, unmoving, his nose tilted up toward the sky. A low rumble in his throat betrayed his tension like a warning drum rolled deep within his chest. Ethan leaned against the porch post, arms folded, eyes sweeping the sky. The clouds were still white, still moving, but slower. He'd grown up in these hills. He knew the signs. The mountain was holding its breath. Inside, Lily was curled on the rug near the wood stove, coloring with focused concentration. She'd drawn the spring again, steam rising in spirals, a small figure sitting beside it with Ranger faithfully by their side. Claire had visited that morning to drop off more inhalation vials and winter supplies, extra batteries, wool blankets, and a laminated emergency plan. She insisted Ethan tack to the cabin wall. She'd mentioned a weather alert. A system's forming off the coast, she'd said, could break wide. Strong winds, sleet, maybe snow at elevation. Ethan had nodded already, moving through his mental checklist: check the chimney seal, anchor the solar panel frame, fortify the shed, and make sure the water cache was covered. But what Claire had said before she left stuck in his mind more than anything else. "I know you've carried this alone for a long time, Ethan," she'd said, "but you don't have to. Not anymore." Then she'd reached out fingers, brushing his forearm in a moment that lingered too long to be casual, but not long enough to be anything more. Not yet. Ethan worked all afternoon, his shirt damp with sweat beneath his flannel, even in the chill. He refastened the tarps over the roof, tightened the ropes around the woodshed, and secured the propane heater near the cabin's rear wall. He paused only once when Ranger led him back toward the trailhead tail, low ears twitching. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked, following. The wind stirred dry leaves across the path, and then he saw it. The inverter. His father's old solar inverter had been tucked under the tarp, forgotten behind the storage hatch. It wouldn't survive the storm exposed. Ethan grabbed it quickly, heaving it onto a flat sled and dragging it up toward the cabin. He didn't see Brad watching from behind the trees. Not yet. That evening, the cabin glowed with warmth and flickering light. Lily sat beside Ethan as he stirred soup over the fire. Ranger lay near the door, still restless. "Do storms always sound like this before they come?" Lily asked, her voice quiet. Ethan stirred slower. "No two storms are the same, but the mountain always knows. Do you think it'll be bad?" Ethan looked at her, really looked. She was still pale but stronger, her breathing steadier, her spirit returning. "I think we'll be ready," he said. They weren't the only ones preparing. Down in the valley, Brad paced the living room of his rental cabin, phone pressed to his ear. "We have to move faster," he said. "He's sealing everything down. If this storm takes out the trail, we lose access for weeks." The man on the other end, the surveyor, sighed. "I told you the water rights aren't that simple. It's shared land, but as long as he's the only one inhabiting it, he's got a claim." "Then we challenge the inhabitation," Brad snapped. "We call child services, escalate the safety concerns. You've already tried that." The doctor vouched for him. Brad turned toward the window, the ridge barely visible through the pine. "Then we wait for nature to finish the job." He hung up and poured himself a drink. But he didn't feel any better. That night the wind arrived like a whisper through the trees, then howled into a scream. Ethan bolted upright in the dark as the first gust slammed against the side of the cabin, shaking the window panes. Ranger barked once, low and sharp. Lily stirred. "Dad." "I'm here," he said, already reaching for the lantern. "Stay under the blankets. Don't move." He moved through the cabin, quickly checking the back door, reinforcing the flue, tucking towels beneath the windowsills where the old frames might leak. Outside, branches cracked. The tarp covering the woodshed flapped violently in the wind. Ranger growled at the door, then barked again, this time toward the woods. "What is it?" Ethan whispered, and then faintly he heard it. A shout. Someone yelling. Ethan grabbed his coat, his boots, and a flashlight. "Stay inside," he called to Lily. "Do not open the door unless it's me." He and Ranger plunged into the storm wind, stinging like needles against his face. The beam from his flashlight barely pierced 10 feet ahead. Snow was beginning to fall sideways, thin but furious. Then the voice came again. "Help!" It was Brad. Ethan found him near the base of the ridge, one leg pinned beneath a downed tree limb, his face white with pain. "What the hell are you doing out here?" Ethan shouted over the wind. I thought I could beat the weather," Brad gasped, was trying to get samples. Soil near the spring tree came down. Ethan looked down. The limb was heavy but not immovable. He didn't think twice. He braced his shoulder, pushed with everything he had, Ranger barking and circling like a coach on the sidelines. With a grunt, he shifted the limb just enough for Brad to drag his leg free. "Can you walk?" "Maybe, yeah." Brad grimaced. "Nothing's broken, I think." Ethan slung his brother's arm over his shoulder and began the slow, brutal climb back up the ridge, the storm raging around them. Back at the cabin, Lily had already set out the emergency blanket and cleared space near the fire. Brad collapsed to the floor, drenched, shaking. Ethan stripped off his coat and tossed it aside. "You're lucky we found you. A few more minutes out there, and you'd be a popsicle." Brad looked at him. Really looked. And what he saw wasn't just a man with calloused hands and a patched jacket. He saw a brother who had changed, who had become. "I didn't think you'd come for me," Brad admitted. Ethan dropped a towel in his lap. "Yeah, I figured." That night, as the storm pounded against the roof, the cabin held. Lily slept beside the fire. Ranger curled near the door, and Ethan sat across from Brad, 2 mugs of hot water between them. "You always had it in you," Brad said quietly. Ethan didn't reply, but he didn't have to. The morning after the storm didn't come with a sunrise. Just gray. Thick, rolling, swallowing everything gray. The kind that settled low in the valley and crawled up the mountainside like a ghost, unsure of its welcome. The wind had died, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the storm itself. Ethan stood outside the cabin boots, half buried in a slush of snow, and mud eyes scanning the horizon. Trees were down. The trail was mangled, and half the path toward the spring had vanished in a silent landslide overnight. Ranger whined low beside him, nudging Ethan's leg. "I see it, boy," Ethan murmured. She took a bite out of the mountain. Behind him, the cabin door creaked. Brad stepped out slowly, limping but upright, a borrowed flannel wrapped tight around his chest. His expression was softer this morning, but also strained, like a man who'd finally realized the world didn't owe him clarity. Ethan didn't say anything. He just nodded toward the damage. "Your surveyors won't get much done now." Brad followed his gaze. "Yeah, I see that." They stood there in silence for a while, both men listening to the sound of melting snow dripping off the pines, each drop loud in the otherwise quiet woods. "Did you know? Brad said finally that I used to think Dad loved you more." Ethan turned surprised. But Brad shrugged, not looking at him. "He always brought you up to the cabin. Gave you that old compass. Taught you to patch walls, start fires. I was the oldest, but he taught you the important stuff." Ethan exhaled. "He brought me up here because I needed fixing. I think he saw pieces of himself in me, the broken pieces. You were already the golden child. You didn't need the mountain. I did." Brad looked down. "I guess I never saw it like that." "Neither did I," Ethan said quietly, "until I came back." Inside the cabin, Lily sat at the small table wrapping a bandage around her stuffed elephant's ear. Claire had shown her how to do proper first aid weeks ago, and now every scratch or torn seam became a patient. Claire herself arrived just after noon, her cheeks flushed from the hike hair damp beneath her beanie. She carried a heavy pack and her signature no-nonsense look. "You made it," Ethan said, holding the door open. "Barely," Claire muttered, brushing snow from her sleeves. Half the main trail is gone. I had to loop around the west slope. It's not safe down there." "I saw it too," Ethan said. "Looks like the mountain coughed in its sleep." Claire gave a tired smile, then spotted Brad, who stood awkwardly by the stove. Her expression didn't change. "Good to see you alive." Brad gave a sheepish nod. "Thanks for what you did, and for standing up for Ethan." Claire turned back to Ethan. "I brought more supplies, medication, extra nebulizer tubing backup battery pack. And," she opened a folder and handed him a page. "Preliminary approval. Your application for historic preservation status. It won't stop them entirely, but it buys you time and legal leverage." Ethan stared at the paper like it was gold. "Claire, how did you—" "I pulled favors. Called in an old professor. Wrote a 17-page justification with footnotes." She smirked. "Never underestimate a woman who pays off her student loans and still remembers how to write angry." He laughed, full genuine, lifting the weight that had hung over him since Brad returned with that clipboard. But the joy faded quickly. Because Ranger barked. Once, then again, sharper. Ethan's head snapped up. Ranger stood at the door-tail's stiff ears pointed west. The direction of the creek. The direction of the spring. And then came the sound. A rumble. Low, distant, but unmistakable. Claire's face went pale. Another slide. No Ethan whispered. Worse, they moved fast. Ethan slung on his coat, grabbed rope and a flashlight, and threw the emergency radio into his bag. Claire checked Lily's oxygen and gave her a tight hug. "Stay here," she said. "Don't open the door for anyone but your dad or me." "Got it," Lily nodded bravely, holding her elephant like a soldier clutches his helmet. Brad insisted on coming. "You're not leaving me behind. I owe you more than a warm blanket." Ethan didn't argue. They followed Ranger's lead down a steep, winding path toward the creek bed that bordered the property line. The one place Ethan hadn't reinforced. The one route that the spring's runoff carved deeper every year. The further they went, the worse the damage looked. A section of forest had given way, trees sheared off roots exposed soil soaked and unstable. Water gushed through the new cut in the land like it had been waiting years to break free. And in the middle of it all, stranded on a spit of land mud swirling around her ankles, was Diana. She was screaming, "Help, I slipped, can't move my leg." Ranger was already pacing the ridge above her, barking frantically. Ethan's jaw tightened. "What the hell is she doing out here? She must have come looking for Brad Clare." Said, "Maybe trying to collect data." "During a storm, she's always been stubborn," Brad muttered, face pale. They didn't waste time. Ethan found a sturdy pine, looped the rope around its base, and began to descend carefully, boots sliding in the loose earth. Claire and Brad anchored the other end. "Hang on, Diana," he called. "I'm coming to get you." The ground trembled slightly as he crossed the slope, just enough to make his breath catch. One misstep, and they'd both be swept into the newly carved ravine below. He reached her, crouched low. Her ankle was twisted, her face streaked with dirt and panic. "I can't feel my foot," she sobbed. "We'll get you out," Ethan said, voice calm. "But you need to trust me. Can you wrap your arms around my shoulders?" She nodded, teeth chattering. He hauled her up, secured the rope under her arms, and signaled to Claire and Brad. Together, inch by inch, they pulled her up. The moment her feet touched solid ground, Diana collapsed into Brad's arms, sobbing. Claire checked her vitals quickly, then nodded. "She'll be okay." Ethan sat back covered in mud, chest heaving. Ranger licked his cheek once, and Ethan reached to scratch behind his ears. "You brought us right to her, didn't you?" he murmured. "Good boy." Back at the cabin, Lily ran out the moment she saw them, returning her eyes wide as she spotted Diana being carried. "She's okay," Ethan assured her, crouching down. "Everyone's safe." Claire helped Diana into the cabin while Brad cleaned off the mud and blood. Ranger circled the porch 3 times before lying down, satisfied. That night, with the wind finally calm and the fire crackling steadily, they all sat in silence. Diana, bandaged and wrapped in a blanket, looked across the room at Ethan. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "About everything." Ethan didn't answer, but he looked over at Lily, who had fallen asleep beside Claire, her hand resting on Ranger's back, and he whispered, "We're all just trying to come home." The morning light came soft and golden, slanting through the cabin window like a quiet apology for the chaos of the day before. Steam rose from 2 chipped mugs on the kitchen table, one in front of Ethan, the other untouched beside Brad, who sat silent, staring at the flames dancing in the wood stove. Diana was asleep in the cot, her ankle wrapped her chest rising and falling with the deep rhythm of exhaustion and maybe, just maybe, humility. Claire stood at the sink washing out a cloth, her sleeves pushed up, the scent of antiseptic faint in the air. Her movements were precise, practiced, comforting. Lily sat cross-legged near the fire, carefully brushing Ranger's coat with a wooden comb she'd found in the old chest. The dog lay blissfully still, his tail thudding, occasionally eyes half closed in approval. It should have felt like calm. But something hung in the air. Brad shifted in his seat and winced. He rubbed his chest, frowning. "You all right?" Ethan asked, eyes narrowing. "Just a tightness. Been off and on since last night." Brad took a shallow breath. "I think it's the cold. Or stress. Or maybe just guilt catching up to me." Ethan's jaw tensed, where Brad gestured across his upper chest over his heart. Claire turned immediately. "How long?" Brad shrugged. "Started sometime after you hauled me out of that pit. Felt like someone was sitting on me for a few seconds. Eased up, then came back a bit ago." Claire's tone shifted, clinical focused. Shortness of breath. Nausea. "A little." "Why, I need you to lie down." "What, Claire? I'm fine. You're not. And we're not guessing." She was already pulling on a pair of gloves, grabbing her stethoscope, moving with swift confidence. Ethan stepped aside as she moved in. Brad lay back reluctantly, still trying to make light of it. But Ethan could see it now. His brother's color was off, his breath just slightly uneven. And in that moment, all the tension between them faded. Underneath everything, land disputes, family drama, old wounds, they were still brothers. Still boys raised under the same leaky roof, still two halves of a shared past neither could fully escape. Claire listened closely, then pulled away. "Your pulse is elevated. Could be a stress response. Could be something more. But we're too far from help to take chances." "I'm not going to the hospital," Brad said quickly. "Road's blocked. Storm cut the valley access." "I know," Claire replied. "So we treat what we can here." She glanced at Ethan. "We need to reduce pressure. Get him warm. Calm. And—" She paused, eyes drifting toward the window. "I want to try something unconventional." Ethan followed her gaze. The spring. 10 minutes later, they were bundled in layers, moving slowly down the slope with Ranger leading and Claire guiding Brad by the arm. Lily stayed behind with Diana, her face brave but full of questions. The trail was muddy but walkable. The steam from the spring curled up into the cold air like breath from the earth itself, welcoming them back. Brad eased himself onto a flat stone by the edge of the water, his skin pale beads of sweat forming on his brow despite the cold. Claire crouched beside him. "I want you to breathe with the heat. Just let it in. The minerals in this steam sulfur magnesium natural vasodilators, they're not a cure, but they might help ease the load. Focus on your breath." Ethan stood beside her, quiet, watching. Brad inhaled, slowly, again and again. The mist wrapped around them like a veil. Claire checked his pulse every few minutes, her face unreadable but steady. After a while, Brad opened his eyes. "It's easier." Claire nodded. "Good. Stay with it." Ethan stepped away, giving them space, his boots crunching lightly on the pebbled edge. He watched the steam rise, watched his brother breathe, watched Claire, her expression the care in her hands, the purpose in her presence. She didn't just fix people. She anchored them. He remembered what she'd said weeks ago. You don't have to do this alone." He didn't answer her then, but standing there now under the open sky watching the person who had once nearly abandoned him be nursed by the woman who had saved his daughter. Something shifted. Trust like thawed soil, finally ready to grow. They returned to the cabin as the sun lowered behind the ridge. Claire made a broth and insisted Brad drink it. She gave him a rundown of warning signs, dosages, and when to send for help. She even wrote it all down, handing Ethan a list he tucked into the front of his journal. After dinner, Lily sat beside Brad and offered him a drawing. It was of him standing between Ethan and Claire holding Ranger's leash, smiling. Brad blinked fast, then reached for her hand. "Thanks, kiddo. You can hang it in your real office," she said, "if you ever stop trying to buy mountains." He laughed, a real one this time. That night, as the fire burned low and everyone drifted into sleep, Ethan and Claire stepped outside into the hush of stars. She wrapped her arms around herself, breathing in the stillness. "You saved him," Ethan said. "I didn't do it alone," she replied. A pause stretched between them. "I was wrong," Ethan said quietly. "I thought this place would fix everything. Just me, Lily the mountain. But it's not the mountain. It's who we share it with." Claire turned to him. "Ethan." He looked at her, and for the first time didn't look away. "I want you here," he said, "not just as a doctor, or neighbor, or someone passing through." She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Instead, she stepped closer, and in the soft dark under a sky thick with stars, her hand found his. They stood like that, two souls, slowly healing, learning to lean. Not because they had to, but because they could. The next morning dawned clear. Not just in the sky, but in the feeling that hummed through the air like a quiet resolve. The storm had passed. The damage had been faced. And something unspoken had settled inside the walls of the old cabin, a fragile peace. The kind earned through weathering something together. The kind that didn't need to be announced, it simply was. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, a pen in hand, staring at a blank sheet of paper. It was the application form for establishing a private conservation trust. Claire had dropped it off that morning along with 2 cups of coffee and one very purposeful look. Brad was resting propped up with extra pillows in the loft, Diana helping him navigate the pain meds and a crossword. For once, she wasn't on her phone or adjusting a scarf. She was present. Lily was outside with Ranger dragging a piece of wood across the dirt, sketching something only she understood. Ethan looked down at the first question on the form. "What is the stated mission of the trust?" he wrote slowly. "To preserve the land, the water, and the breath of those who need a place to begin again." Then he set the pen down and let out a long breath heavy with everything that had built to this moment. An hour later, they held a meeting on the porch, Ethan, Claire, Brad, and Diana. Ranger lay near the steps as always, half listening like the mountain's guardian. Ethan had a folder in his lap. Claire had a laptop and printouts from the county office. Brad and Diana exchanged glances, but neither looked hostile. Just cautious. Ethan began. "I've submitted the preliminary paperwork to establish a conservation trust, Raven's Hollow Preservation Fund. It gives us legal grounds to restrict commercial development, set usage limitations, and hold the mineral rights under a non-profit entity." Diana raised a brow. Meaning, Ethan said, the spring stays protected. No bottled water deals, no spas, no condos carved into the hillside. Brad shifted. "And what's our role in this? You said trust. Are we part of that?" Claire stepped in. "Yes. You both would be listed as supporting stakeholders. You'll have oversight, but not control. Ethan holds the primary steward role. The board will include a rotating health advisor, someone from the local community, and a conservation legal rep. This isn't a power play, it's a shield." Diana crossed her arms. "And you just expect us to give up our shares?" "No," Ethan said. "You're not giving up anything. You're investing. In legacy, in healing, in something that matters more than a quick payout. Brad looked down at the printouts in front of him. Financial models, deed structures, clauses, and footnotes. He didn't say anything for a long while. Then he looked up, voice rough. Can I still bring my son here someday? Teach him how to make a fire, how to breathe this air, the way Dad taught us? Ethan nodded. That's the point, Claire added softly. This place doesn't belong to just one person anymore. It belongs to those who need it. Diana let out a breath and rubbed her temples. You always were the stubborn one, Ethan. He smiled. And now I've got paperwork to back it up. That made her laugh. It was small but real. Later that afternoon, Ethan and Lily walked the trail to the spring this time with Ranger leading them at a slow, contented pace. Lily carried a wooden sign under her arm, hand-painted with chipped green letters. Raven's Hollow. A place to breathe. Ethan carried a hammer and a small post. He'd carved it himself over the past few evenings while Lily slept using one of his dad's old chisels and sandpaper from the emergency stash. They stopped at the ridge where the steam first came into view. I think here, Lily said, so people see it before they go down. Ethan nodded. Here's good. They set the post, tapped it into the softened ground, and together they nailed the sign into place. Lily stepped back to admire it, brushing her hands on her coat. It looks perfect, she whispered. Ethan slung an arm around her shoulders. You know, he said this place healed more than just your lungs. She looked up at him, curious. It healed my heart, too, he said, and helped your Uncle Brad remember how to love people again, helped your Aunt Diana listen. She thought about that for a moment, then smiled, and it helped you love Miss Claire. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah, maybe it did. They stood there for a while, saying nothing more, just breathing in the stillness. The way the mist danced between the rocks, the sound of the wind winding gently through the trees, the steady beat of Ranger's tail tapping the earth. Then Lily reached down, picked up a smooth stone, and set it at the base of the sign. For everyone who comes after, she said. Ethan did the same. Back at the cabin, Claire was reading by the fire when they returned. Ethan kissed Lily's forehead and sent her inside to wash up, then walked over to Claire. He took her hand gently. Board's forming next month, he said. You'll be on it. I figured, she teased. You're terrible at hiding big news. I'm not asking you as a doctor. She raised an eyebrow. I'm asking you as someone who saved my daughter, helped my family, and made me believe again. Her fingers tightened around his. I'm in, she whispered. Ethan looked out at the ridge the peaks touched with gold by the setting sun. And Claire, he said, voice low, I think I want to stay in this life, with you in it. She smiled, tears brimming. Then let's build it right here. And they stood there as the mountain watched two hearts finally steady, promising not just to each other, but to the land, the healing, the breath between storms. A promise not to conquer the mountain, but to belong to it. Spring came quietly to the mountain, not in grand sweeps of color or sudden warmth, but in the soft defiance of snow melting from pine needles and the trickle of thawed creeks carving their way back into familiar paths. Life here didn't explode into bloom. It unfolded, like healing, like trust. Ethan stood on the porch of the cabin, mug of coffee in hand, watching as Ranger trotted across the clearing with something in his mouth. A stick. No, he squinted. It was a ribbon, pink, frayed at the edges. He chuckled. Where'd you get that, boy? Ranger trotted proudly up the steps, tail wagging, and dropped the ribbon at Ethan's feet. Then sat tongue-lolling like he'd just presented a crown. All right, Ethan said, leaning down. What am I supposed to do with this? Lily's voice rang out behind him. It's from the welcome basket Miss Janey left at the co-op. She said it's tradition every new board member gets a ribbon to tie around the old cedar as a blessing. Ethan looked up. Claire was walking toward him, her cheeks pink from the morning air, hair pulled back, eyes soft. She said it was symbolic, Claire added. A way of saying, This land has your heart now." Ethan smiled, twirling the ribbon between his fingers. "I think it already does." Inside the cabin had never felt more alive. The kitchen shelves were stocked a new water filter system humming quietly in the corner. The solar inverter, salvaged, repaired, and blessed by sheer stubbornness, powered a few lights and a small fridge Claire had donated. But it wasn't just the upgrades. It was the presence. The cabin wasn't just a place to hide anymore. It had become a place to live. Lily sat at the table writing in her journal. Her breathing was light, now consistent. She still used the nebulizer sometimes, especially on dry days, but the fear had lifted. She laughed more. She chased butterflies with Ranger. She asked questions about trout and moss and how deep the spring really went. And Ethan. He was learning to breathe, too. Not just through his lungs, but through the quiet moments. The way the cabin creaked in the wind like it was singing. The way Claire's hand would brush his when she passed him a coffee mug. The way Brad now called every Sunday asking about board updates like he was trying to earn the title of recovering control freak. Even Diana had softened. She sent books for Lily and herbal teas for Claire with notes like, "Don't get used to me being thoughtful." That evening, Claire sat on the porch rail flipping through a binder. "First board meetings next week," she said. "We've got local nurses, a school teacher from the valley, and that forestry grad student who never stops talking about owls." Ethan grinned. "Perfect. Nothing says balanced governance like birds of prey and a fourth-grade science teacher." Claire set the binder aside and looked at him. "You're nervous?" He took a deep breath. "A little. Not about the board. About what comes next." "Us." "Yeah." Claire tilted her head. "What do you want next?" Ethan was quiet a moment. "Then I want to build something. With you. With Lily. Not just the land. A life." Claire blinked, then smiled. "You already are." They took the long way to the cedar that evening, Lily skipping ahead, Ranger bouncing between them like an overexcited usher. The tree stood at the far edge of the clearing, ancient and wide bark furrowed deep like a topographic map of every season it had survived. Lily stood on tiptoes and tied her ribbon to a low branch. "For Mom," she whispered, "and for Claire." Ethan stepped forward next, tying his ribbon slowly, carefully. "For what brought us here," he said. Claire tied hers last. "For what we're building next." They stepped back, the wind rustling the ribbons until they danced together like prayer flags, soft and certain. Lily looked up at them, squinting. "Does this mean we're a real family now?" Ethan looked at Claire. Claire looked at him. He reached for her hand. "You tell us, Lily." She grinned, pulled both their hands together and sandwiched them between her own. "Then it's official." That night, the stars came out bold and unafraid, scattered across the sky like they belonged to someone who finally remembered how to dream. Inside the cabin, the fire glowed warm. Claire sat beside Ethan on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder, her fingers laced with his. Lily was fast asleep upstairs, Ranger snoring softly at the foot of the stairs like a guardian who finally knew his people were safe. Ethan closed his eyes, listening to the breath of the mountain outside, the rhythm of life inside, and the quiet thump of Claire's heartbeat against his side. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. This was it. Not the end, but the beginning. It was a crisp morning in late spring, the kind that made you breathe deeper without even thinking about it. The air held the scent of pine needles and damp earth with a hint of wildflowers blooming somewhere just out of sight. Birds called to one another across the clearing, and the sunlight filtered through the tall trees like gold dust in motion. Ethan sat on the cabin steps, his coffee cooling in his hand. He wasn't in a rush to drink it. Not today. From where he sat, he could see Lily and Ranger down by the old cedar. She was tying something around its trunk, a piece of hand-painted wood slung with twine. Even from here he could make out the lettering, her neat, careful handwriting carved into the grain with a small pocket knife Claire had given her. Raven's Hollow, a place to breathe. He smiled. Somewhere behind him the cabin door creaked open. Claire stepped outside, a second mug in her hand. She wore one of Ethan's flannels over her sundress, her hair loose and swaying in the breeze. Her presence didn't startle him, it never did. She fit here now as naturally as the wind through the trees or the rhythm of Lily's laughter. She sat beside him, offering the mug. He took it, their fingers brushing. "She's been working on that sign for a week," Claire said, watching Lily proudly hammer the last nail into the post beside the tree. Ethan nodded. She said Ranger helped pick the name. Claire grinned. "Of course he did." They watched in silence for a moment. Down below, Lily knelt and whispered something to Ranger, who barked once and wagged his tail like he understood every word. "She's changed so much," Claire murmured. "Healthier, braver." Ethan's throat tightened. "Happier, too." Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. "You gave her that?" "No," Ethan said softly. "We did." Later that afternoon, the little clearing at Raven's Hollow came alive with familiar faces. Neighbors, board members, even the postwoman from town showed up carrying a plate of lemon bars. It wasn't a ceremony exactly, not official, but it felt like one. Brad and Diana arrived just after lunch, Brad holding a hand-carved cane he insisted he didn't need. Diana brought homemade cider and a potted rosemary bush to ward off ticks and evil spirits. Ethan suspected it was her peace offering. The community had voted to establish the healing reserve just a month ago. Raven's Hollow would remain protected land, no commercial spas, no luxury condos, no fences. Just a cabin, a spring, and an open door for those in need. Claire had drafted the bylaws herself. Ethan had cried reading them. Ranger, now something of a local legend, received a medal from the town council for service and instinct beyond human measure. Lily insisted he wear it on a red ribbon around his neck like a hero in an old western. He strutted accordingly. As the sun dipped low behind the mountains, casting amber light across the clearing, Ethan stood near the cedar tree with Lily on one side and Claire on the other. Someone strummed a guitar near the fire pit. A few voices hummed along to an old Appalachian lullaby. Children chased fireflies through the tall grass while parents sipped cider and traded stories. Lily tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Can I tell everyone something?" He nodded. "Of course." She stepped up on the flat stone at the base of the cedar and cleared her throat. "My name is Lily. This is my dad, and this is Claire. And this place—" She paused, looking out at the people gathered. "This place saved us." The clearing grew quiet. "I used to be sick a lot. I used to be scared a lot, too. But then we came here and we found something better than medicine." She reached for Ethan's hand and then Claire's. "We found people who didn't leave. There wasn't a dry eye in the clearing." Brad clapped first, then Diana, then everyone. That night, after the guests had gone and the fire had dwindled to glowing embers, the little family stayed outside. Lily curled up in a sleeping bag beside Ranger, staring up at the stars. Claire lay on the porch hammock, her head resting in Ethan's lap, a blanket draped over them both. "Do you think your parents would have loved this?" Claire asked softly. Ethan looked up at the stars, letting the stillness answer first. "I think," he said finally, "they would have stayed." Claire's fingers found his intertwining, slowly. "You stayed." "I almost didn't," he whispered, "but I'm glad I did." She looked up at him. "Me too." He kissed her forehead, then leaned back, letting the quiet of the mountain settle around them like a second skin. The cabin creaked. An owl called in the distance. Ranger snored gently beside Lily, his metal glinting in the firelight. And somewhere inside Ethan's chest, the ache that had lived there for years, grief, shame, loneliness, finally loosened its grip. He breathed, not just in, but out, fully, finally. Final image. The camera pulls back soft, wide, and slow. The cabin glows gently against the trees. The spring bubbles quietly in the distance. The cedar tree stands tall, its bark wrapped in ribbons, its roots deep and strong. At its base, a sign, Raven's Hollow, a place to breathe. Because sometimes the family we build is stronger than the one that broke us. And sometimes healing doesn't come in hospitals or handouts, but in cabins in kindness, in love that stays. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever known someone who was abandoned, or found healing in the most unexpected of places, then maybe this story was meant for you. We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment of unexpected kindness, a second chance, or a healing journey? Like Ethan and Lily's. Share your story in the comments below. You never know who might need to hear it. And tell us, where in the world are you listening from? We've had beautiful souls join us from Texas, Florida, California, the Carolinas, even as far as the Yorkshire Dales and the heart of Australia. We'd love to welcome you to our storytelling family. If this story moved you, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs hope today, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt tales just like this one. Thank you for spending time with us. From our storytelling family to yours, stay kind, stay hopeful. And remember, sometimes the family we build is the one that saves us. Until next time.